When you examine Jess Howard's delivery paths on paper, they appear chaotic, weaving through roadside eateries, military veterans' locations, and rural communities. A cocky young logistics coordinator ridicules her choices publicly at the company, prompting an unlikely observer to personally investigate her reasoning. His discoveries during the journey defy any navigation system's predictions. Can gut feelings outperform hard data? Dawn had not yet arrived when Jess Highway Howard guided her Kenworth, nicknamed Rosie, away from the Red Line transport facility in Dallas. The aged vehicle produced a deep, recognizable rumble that comes only from extensive use and character. Jess settled into her seat, maintaining firm control of the steering wheel while her black coffee thermos released steam on the dashboard. Her planned journey was confirmed, though it differed from what the coordination office anticipated. Redline headquarters. Kyle Reynolds had already arrived at his workstation. Recently graduated from university, he held a clipboard in one hand and digital tablet in the other, scrutinizing the live tracking display. "She's heading westward," he complained once more. He directed his colleague's attention to the screen. "She's increasing her distance by 40 miles by routing through Amarillo. That's completely illogical. Interstate 40 eastbound is completely clear. She's squandering both fuel and hours." "Have you actually encountered Jess?" An experienced dispatcher responded with amusement. "She follows her own navigation system." Kyle responded dismissively. "That navigation system is malfunctioning." What Kyle remained unaware of was that 350 miles westward from Dallas, adjacent to Interstate 40, stood Mackey's Diner, its fading neon advertisement flickering above a dusty parking area. Jess arrived shortly after 10 a.m. and entered. Without speaking, she pushed a $100 bill toward Mary, the proprietor. "The usual arrangement," Jess stated. Mary acknowledged with a nod. "3 broken-down rigs are stranded near Vega. Damaged tires, no money. Ensure they receive food." 10 minutes afterward, Jess resumed her journey. 5 warm meals were packaged and secured in the front passenger area. She took a brief diversion down a maintenance road where several dusty semi-trucks sat motionless in a gravel rest area. Drivers stood against their vehicles, attempting to conceal their desperation. Jess's stop was brief. She simply distributed the food, offered them a smile, and departed before they could express more than gratitude. Meanwhile, Rick Langford, concealing his identity as freelance driver Rick Morrison, traveled eastward on Interstate 30, accelerating steadily. In his late 50s, observant and solidly built, Rick appeared nothing like a billionaire chief executive. His truck was leased, his identification fraudulent, and his objective confidential. He embarked on an expedition driven by equal measures of interest and frustration. At headquarters, he'd witnessed a tense conversation between Jess and a young dispatcher who mocked her routing decisions. Jess had responded calmly, "There's more to these highways than what appears on your screen." That statement remained with him, not merely for its content, but for her delivery. Rick had constructed Red Line through measurements, coordination, and productivity. Yet something in Jess's tone prompted him to question whether he'd overlooked something essential. Therefore, he chose to verify it. He'd complete the identical haul from Dallas to St. Louis, same endpoint, optimized pathway, and demonstrate definitively whether intuition could surpass information. He avoided diners or diversions. His navigation system displayed a direct path to St. Louis. Information didn't deceive, or so he assumed. At by midday, Jess arrived in Oklahoma City. She entered Tank's Garage, a dusty automotive shop at the boundary of an industrial district. The structure appeared abandoned, apart from the American flag outside, still fresh and vertical. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with oil and memories. Tank Thompson emerged from underneath a raised Peterbuilt, grease covering his hands and walking with a limp. Jess presented him with a package wrapped in brown paper. Tools you couldn't obtain last month, plus that soldering device you requested. Tank appeared surprised. You weren't obligated to. Jess interrupted him with a smile. You rescued my axle in Salt Lake back in 2019. I'm simply evening the score. Their conversation was brief. Neither favored sentimentality. However, before Jess departed, Tank retrieved from a drawer an old photograph. 6 soldiers in desert uniforms. Jess among them. Still reminisce about him, he said quietly. Me as well? Jess answered, her gaze lingering on a recognizable face now deceased. Back on the interstate, Jess activated her CB radio. Traffic communications warned of a multiple vehicle collision east of Tulsa. She modified her course, heading north earlier than scheduled. Rick, meanwhile, was immobilized. The accident had paralyzed the interstate in both directions. His navigation system suggested a detour through a small town, allegedly a shortcut. He followed it unquestioningly. 50 minutes later, he slammed his brakes. A concrete obstruction blocked the road ahead. The bridge had collapsed in the previous week's storm. Local maintenance teams hadn't even reached it yet. Rick cursed, reversed down a narrow road for miles, and attempted another route. As Jess approached Springfield, Missouri, the sun started its decline. Her final destination was a low, unremarkable warehouse behind a defunct truck depot. She tapped her horn twice. The bay doors slowly rolled upward, revealing pallets stacked with canned provisions, hygiene supplies, and sleeping bags. A dozen gray-haired men and women, former drivers, mostly veterans, emerged to welcome her. We're depleted of water, one mentioned, and jackets. Jess retrieved a manifest from her dashboard. I have 2 pallets of bottled water and fleece blankets from that school fundraiser in Fort Worth. She assisted with unloading, then remained for 15 peaceful minutes listening. A story here, a joke there. These weren't merely old acquaintances. This was a network, a support system Jess had helped construct 1 mile at a time. Hundreds of miles distant, Rick struggled to outpace a wall of lightning in a side mirror. The storm had unexpectedly shifted northward, striking the route his navigation system indicated was clear. He gripped the wheel tightly through torrents of rain, his confidence starting to deteriorate. As he finally reached a gas station outside Rolla, drenched and exhausted, his radio crackled. Breaker 19, is that you stuck behind the tanker earlier? It was Jess. Next time, she stated, voice composed and entertained, you might want to consult the road before relying on the screen. Rick stared into the dark windshield, the storm subsiding around him. He couldn't formulate a response. And then he began listening. The Oklahoma sun was already scorching the horizon's edges when Jess noticed the boy. He stood just beyond the entrance ramp outside Tulsa, hunched beneath a billboard, arms clutched tightly around a weathered backpack. He couldn't have exceeded 15 years, too young to be here alone, too proud to appear frightened. His footwear was worn to the soles, and his sweatshirt draped off his frame like it belonged to another person. He wasn't displaying a sign. He wasn't even attempting to signal anyone, just standing there waiting. Jess maneuvered Rosie toward the shoulder and allowed the engine to idle. Hazard lights flashing in rhythm with her intuition. She lowered the passenger window. You seeking transportation? The boy turned slowly, uncertain. He took several hesitant steps toward the cab. Just anywhere westward, he stated, voice parched and quiet. Jess examined him. Not the typical type of problem. No scent of drugs or desperation. Just a quiet pain. Like someone who'd exhausted places to feel accepted. You have a phone? She inquired. He shook his head. Name? Dylan. Where's home, Dylan? He hesitated. East of here. Doesn't matter. Jess glanced forward, then back at the kid. You're not entering this truck unless I contact someone who cares about you. His shoulders dropped. After a moment, he extracted a crumpled scrap of paper from his backpack. A name and number written in pen. Jess dialed. It rang once, then again, then a voice responded tight with panic. Hello, who is this? Ma'am, Jess stated, maintaining her voice level. I discovered a boy outside Tulsa. He stated his name is Dylan. Are you his mother? A sharp intake of breath. Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Is he injured? Please. Is he all right? He's not injured, just tired. He lacked a phone. He stated he left because he didn't know what else to do. On the other end, the woman began to weep. I've been searching for him for 2 days. The police advised to wait, stated he'd return, but I knew. Jess nodded to herself. There's a shelter on Tulsa's north side. It's peaceful, secure, operated by people I trust. Can you arrive there within an hour? I'll be there. Please inform him I'm coming. Jess returned the note to Dylan, who'd been listening through the window, but not meeting her eyes. I'm not transporting you west, she stated gently, but I'll take you someplace better. He climbed in silently. They didn't converse much during the drive. Dylan stared out the window like he wasn't certain what he wanted to see. At one point, he inquired, You ever depart without a plan? Jess didn't respond immediately. Yeah, she stated eventually. Sometimes the road's the only quiet you've got. They reached the shelter, an old church with peeling paint, bright murals on the bricks, and the warm scent of chili drifting from the back kitchen. Jess parked and escorted him to the front steps where a volunteer opened the door with a soft smile. Moments later, a car screeched into the lot. A woman leapt out before it had fully stopped. Tears in her eyes, arms outstretched. Dylan froze, then walked slowly toward her. The embrace was clumsy, too tight, but neither of them released. Jess stood to the side, hands in her pockets. One of the volunteers recognized her. Your highway, right? The one with the old Kenworth. Jess nodded. The woman handed her a small bag, a few energy bars, a red line patch, a folded prayer card. Drivers like you. You're the reason we persevere. Jess didn't reply. She simply turned back to Rosie, started the engine, and pulled onto the road once more. Behind her, a reunion. Ahead, another mile. And somewhere in between, the reason she kept driving. Back on the highway, Rick wasn't faring so well. He'd been forced onto a smaller highway after storm debris closed his original route. Then came the accident, a jackknifed rig on a two-lane road obstructing both directions. Emergency crews hadn't arrived. No detour in sight. Trucks idled behind him. Time burned away. He attempted calling Redline Dispatch, but received only hold music. He checked his navigation system. No alternate route. For the first time since departing Dallas, he considered calling in as CEO, but then a horn. Jess pulled up on the opposite shoulder. She stepped down, toolbox in one hand and 2 plastic-wrapped sandwiches in the other. Still relying on that app, she called with a grin. Rick stared. How did you, CB chatter? Word travels faster out here than in any office. She moved with purpose, speaking to the driver of the disabled truck while Rick observed. In 20 minutes, she'd assisted in resecuring a load, clearing enough space for others to squeeze by, and distributing food to the first 3 rigs stuck behind. Jess offered Rick a sandwich without comment and leaned on his truck's hood. "I suppose this is where I thank you," Rick stated, unwrapping it. "You can thank me by not pretending you're just some freelance driver," she replied casually. "That rental's Redline's fleet. Your face all over Forbes 2 years ago." Rick blinked. "You knew." Jess shrugged. "You're not the first suit to follow me, but you're the first one smart enough to listen." She didn't inquire why he was out there. Instead, she nodded toward the open road. "You ready to keep moving?" Rick didn't answer, but for the first time, he wasn't focused on beating a time. He was watching her, how she moved, how others responded to her. There was something more than efficiency here, something alive. They drove on, sometimes a few miles apart, sometimes side by side. When Jess veered off toward a faded service station outside of Anita, Rick followed. The station looked like it belonged to another decade. Faded Texaco sign, rust on the pumps, cracked windows. A man in a wheelchair rolled out from the garage, wiping his hands on a Redline towel. "Jess," he called, smiling. "Faye, Ramon." She opened her trailer and pulled out 2 boxes of Redline promotional materials, shirts, hats, and oil filters for the fundraiser. Ramon nodded. "We're barely making rent. These will help. And tell Redline thanks for not forgetting us." Rick stayed back, watching. Ramon clearly didn't know who he was, or perhaps didn't care, but it struck Rick. This station wasn't profitable. The town barely showed up on the logistics maps, and yet Jess had carved space in her hull for this. Later that night, they reached Joplin. Jess didn't stop at the truck plaza or the main depot. She turned down a side street lined with shuttered warehouses. Rick hesitated, then followed, in a cavernous building with broken skylights. Rows of supplies were stacked: tents, blankets, hygiene kits. A group of older veterans, some missing limbs, others wearing faded Redline hats, greeted Jess like family. "New drop?" one asked. Jess opened her side compartment. 2 pallets of winter gear straight from Fort Worth. They unloaded quickly. The space buzzed with quiet urgency. Rick approached her as she tightened the last cargo strap. "This isn't a route," he stated. "It's a mission." Jess didn't look at him. "I lost someone out there. Afghanistan." His name was Marcus. Smart, funny, scare out of his mind half the time. But he had this thing where he always volunteered. Always. Said, if you weren't helping, you were just taking up space. She stepped back, watching the veterans organize supplies. "I never got to save him, but I can save pieces." Rick stood beside her in silence, feeling like he wasn't leading. This time, he was just learning. They didn't speak much as they pulled back onto the road, but the space between their rigs was shorter now. The miles didn't feel like competition anymore. And up ahead, the night opened wide. Not empty, but full of stories Jess had never told. And Rick had just begun to hear of the T Redline HQ in Dallas. The conference room projector cast charts and graphs across the wall like they were gospel. Kyle Reynolds stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd been burning the midnight oil that a slideshow ticked through line graphs showing route lengths, fuel consumption, and cost per mile calculations, all with one common thread. Jess Highway Howard. "This is unsustainable," Kyle stated, clicking to the next slide. Jess's average mileage per route consistently exceeds our benchmarks. Her delivery times deviate by 15 to 20%. And her detours, unlogged, unapproved, and frankly unjustifiable. A few nods followed, but there was hesitation too. Her deliveries are always on time, someone offered. Kyle smiled thinly. Sure, but at what cost? When one driver ignores company standards, others start thinking they can too. If we want Redline to scale, we need uniformity, efficiency, predictability. He leaned in, voice firm. Jess Howard is a liability in disguise. But just as he clicked to his next slide, a voice from the back interrupted. You ever driven a rig, Kyle? It was Manny Ortega, a veteran driver with 30 years under his belt and a coffee mug that said, Don't rush me. I'm still waiting for the coffee to kick in. Kyle smirked. With respect, no. But I don't need to. The data tells the story. Manny stood. Funny. Data never helped me when my axle snapped outside Cheyenne in a wideout. Jess got to me before roadside assistance did, with chains, a thermos of chili, and a spare part she'd carried for months. The room went quiet, then another voice. She helped me through my divorce. Kept calling every night just to make sure I ate and slept. She got insulin to my wife when the pharmacy messed up a shipment, said someone else. She kept me from quitting after I lost my brother. One by one, the room shifted. The charts faded into the background. In their place, stories, human stories, came forward, each one a thread in a larger fabric Jess had been weaving quietly for years. Kyle looked unsettled. That's admirable, but it's not sustainable at scale. Maybe it's not about scale, Manny said. Maybe it's about heart. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Rick and Jess rolled through Missouri, their trucks cruising side by side down Highway 44. Not racing, not competing, just moving forward that Rick's tone had softened over the past day. He was trying to understand her. What made you stay on the road? He asked over the radio. Just didn't answer right away. Then, same thing that keeps you hiding behind a fake name. Rick laughed, not defensively, but with genuine self-awareness. Jess continued. The road gives you space to think, to hurt quietly, to help where you can. Rick considered that. You really knew who I was the whole time. Jess shrugged. Didn't take much. You handle your rig like someone who's trained, but not seasoned. And you listen more than you talk. That's rare. They rolled past an exit for Rolla. The sky ahead pale and open. You don't trust dispatch? Rick asked. I trust some of them, but most don't see what's out here. They see numbers. I see people. I see a family holding a cardboard sign in Amarillo. A disabled vet running a garage. A kid scared to call home. You don't fix those things with an app. They didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't awkward. It was mutual reflection, a T-red line St. Louis. The sun was just beginning to set as both rigs rolled into the lot. Jess from the north, Rick from the southeast. They parked within seconds of each other. Kyle was already there, tablet in hand, ready to compare timestamps and mileage logs. But as Rick stepped down from his cab, Kyle's smirk froze. Rick Morrison, he asked. Rick took off his cap. No, Richard Langford. A beat of stunned silence passed through the lot. I wanted to see the road for myself, he said. Not from a boardroom, not from a dashboard from the cab. And I followed your liability every mile. He turned to Jess. You didn't take the fastest route, but you took the right one. You avoided every delay. You helped half a dozen people. And somehow we still got here together. Kyle opened his mouth, but Rick cut him off. I've seen your reports. They're clean, precise, but they miss the most important part of this company. He gestured around the lot. The people. Jess nodded once, as if to say, finally. Then she walked toward her truck, tugging her hat lower. Not interested in ceremony. Rick, watch her go. She's not just a driver, he said to the group now gathering. She's the reason this company works. Inside Redline HQ, the boardroom lights dimmed. The charts were forgotten, and the company saw itself not as a machine of metrics, but as a community built mile by mile. In the rearview mirror of one veteran trucker, the road behind shimmered with stories that didn't fit on any map, but mattered more than any line on a chart ever could. The Red Line Transport Logistics floor had never been this full. Dispatchers, drivers, warehouse managers, mechanics. Everyone had been called into the building just after lunch for an emergency all-hands meeting. The break room coffee was still brewing when the projector fired up in the main conference hall and whispers rippled across the crowd. Rick Langford stood at the front, no longer wearing the faded shirt or trucker hat that had disguised him as Rick Morrison. He wore no tie, no suit, just jeans, a clean redline polo, and the same dust on his boot from the road he'd just traveled. Kyle Reynolds stood near the sidewall, arms crossed tight, jaw set. He didn't like surprises, especially not ones that made his power feel small. Rick looked over the crowd, took a breath, and began. I founded Redline Transport to move freight, but more importantly, to move trust, to keep promises, to be better than the companies that treated drivers like numbers. He paused. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it silenced the room. Last week, I put on a fake name and got behind the wheel. I followed one of our most experienced drivers across 4 states. Not to test her, but to understand what we've become. He turned toward a slide on the screen. It showed a winding map, Jess's route from Dallas to St. Louis. To some, this route looks inefficient. But what I saw meals delivered to stranded truckers, a runaway kid reunited with his mother, a broken gas station given a chance to stay open, a warehouse run by veterans stocking food for the forgotten. Another slide, a photo of Jess standing beside her Kenworth, squinting into the sun, hand resting on the fender like it was part of her. This is the kind of driver we should be learning from. The audience murmured. Heads nodded. A few clapped softly. Then Rick's gaze shifted to Kyle. You compiled impressive charts. You crunched data, flagged anomalies, but you failed in one critical area. Empathy. You didn't ask why she took those detours. You didn't listen to the people on the ground. You were so focused on control that you missed the story right in front of you. Kyle's face tightened, but he didn't speak. I'm not letting you go because you were wrong, Rick continued. I'm letting you go because you refuse to learn. Silence. Kyle picked up his tablet, nodded stiffly, and walked out without a word. Rick turned back to the team. I've seen the best and worst of logistics. We can do better. Starting today, we'll launch a new initiative, Operation Atlas, a nationwide expansion of veteran-friendly truck stops, hubs for support, supplies, and connection. Not just rest areas, safe harbors. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. And I want Jess Howard to lead it. The room turned. Jess, standing near the rear exit with grease on her jeans and a skeptical look in her eye, raised an eyebrow. I appreciate the offer, she said, voice steady. But I'm not meant for a desk. I do my best work on the road. Rick smiled. Then that's exactly where you'll lead from. You build the network your way. She nodded once. No theatrics, no applause, just quiet understanding. Later that evening, as twilight stretched across the St. Louis sky, Jess climbed back into Rosie. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting the hum of the engine settle into her chest like a heartbeat, a new route. A different mission, but still the same road beneath her wheels. Rick approached, holding a rolled-up blueprint, the initial draft of Operation Atlas. He passed it to her through the window. "There's no map for this," he said. "There never was," Jess replied, folding the document and sliding it behind her seat. A gust of wind caught the bottom of her jacket as she shifted into gear. Rick stepped back. Jess gave him a short nod, something between gratitude and farewell, then pulled out of the depot and ceremony. No speech, just the rumble of tires rolling toward the horizon. As her truck faded into the distance, the camera would rise, sweeping over highways that twist through towns, deserts, cities, and shadows. Each stretch of asphalt a line in someone's story. Each rest stop a refuge. Each delivery more than cargo. A moment of trust passed hand to hand, that we don't always choose the easiest road. But the ones that matter, they're never straight lines. And in the end, it's not the miles that define the journey. It's who you become along the way. This story reminds us, not every detour is wasted time. Some save lives. If you were Jess, would you keep driving your way or follow the numbers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this journey moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that matter. See you in the next video.